Welcome back to Elevated Inspiration for Sunday School. We're at lesson 12 today, May the 17th, 2020. It's entitled Practice Justice. This week we're going to be looking at Jeremiah. He's a major prophet. He prophesies to the southern children for about 40 years, from 526 BC until 586 BC. Now, he prophesied during the time of King Josiah. Now, King Josiah is important because he did not follow the evilness of his father Amon nor his grandfather Manasseh. King Josiah followed the Lord. You can see this in 2 Kings 22 and 2. He even led the people to renew their covenant with God. He was brought about many reforms in Judah, including repairing the temple, removing pagan idolatry from the land, and observing the Passover. Now, although Josiah did much good, he could not ultimately overcome the great evils done by the kings who had gone before him. And then on top of that, his sons who came after him continued to do evil. So that's what I want you to see next. If you notice King Josiah's son, there's Jehoaz. He was king, but he was only king for 3 months because Pharaoh Necho was in Egypt, and he actually um, took the king Jehoaz and made him a prisoner, imprisoned him in Egypt. And then he made Josiah's son Jehoiakim the king in his place. And then the Pharaoh Necho was defeated by the Babylonians, and Judah fell into the hands of the Babylonians next year when Jehoiakim rebelled against Babylon's king Nebuchadnezzar. Then Nebuchadnezzar invaded Judah, besieged Jerusalem, and disposed Jehoiakim. This is around 598 BC, and carried his son Jehoiachin into exile the next year. And he made Zedekiah the king. So Nebuchadnezzar put Zedekiah as king of the southern kingdom, which is Judah, and basically we're at chapter 21. Okay, so this right here kind of give you a picture. And one thing I want to pull from this is that remember, the kings of Judah were part of no ordinary royal house. They were actually descendants from David, and David was a man after God's own heart. And this kingship here is the Messiah is going to come through. So this right here to kind of give you, we're at number 5. Zedekiah is actually king, and he's kind of the last king before they go into captivity. So chapter 21. Zedekiah just sent 2 individuals to meet prophet Jeremiah. And what they mainly want to do is ask to ensure God aid them against King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, because the city is being besieged and they needed help, and they want help from God. No doubt Zedekiah is thinking about his great grandfather Hezekiah. When Hezekiah prayed to God, God delivered the children of Israel from their enemy. So Zedekiah thinks that since God has protected Jerusalem in the past, he might do it again, because they are special. They are God's chosen people, and God loves Jerusalem, the city, and they have the temple there. And under David, everything flourished, and no doubt God is going to avenge them of their enemy once again. So his response is totally different. Here's a total misunderstanding about God. So if you look at verses 1 through 7, chapter 21, Jeremiah gives King Zedekiah some very bad news. Not only is God not going to help them, but he will fight against them and turn them over to their enemies. So let's stop right here. I want you to think about this question. How shall we respond, if at all, to those whose prayers reflect their own desired outcomes more than openness to God's will? How do we respond to people when they, what we entitle, give selfish prayers instead of what is God's will. Just think about that as we move through this lesson. Okay, so the first outline, we at Jeremiah 21, 8 through 10. We have two things here. We have a choice to make, that's in verse 8, and the consequences to consider. And just take time and read these first three verses here. If you press pause. So, if you read these three verses, you'll notice that God gives the people two choices. What were there? He said, if you stay in the city and die by the sword, the famine, or the plague, or if you go out of the city and surrender to the Babylonians. So you had two choices here. You can stay and die, or you can surrender and live. And if you notice his attitude towards the city of Jerusalem, how was his attitude? He has set his face against it and will bring harm, not good to it. This is one time we see the opposite of what we expect from God. At this point, God is fed up. He set his face against that city, and he's going to turn that city over to the Babylons. And what will happen? There it is. He's going to turn it over to King of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, who will destroy it with fire. So we have two in the next verses 11 through 14. We have the judgment and we have the punishment. So press pause, and I want you to read these scriptures. Now, in these scriptures, I want you to notice the judgment. The judgment is how they have dealt with the leadership now, and this is the king's house, how they have dealt with the poor, the oppressed. Notice he says, start each day by dealing with justice. Rescue victims from the exploiters. And they failed to do that. And that's the reason why God has a punishment set for them. And this is the leadership. So what clue is given in verse 12 about what the leaders of Jerusalem had been doing wrong? If you notice, they had not been executing justice daily. They had not been delivering people from their oppressors. Leadership is so important. And leaders must have integrity. They must do what's right. So in what way did the Jerusalem physical situation give them false sense of security? I like this answer here because they were at the top of the mountain with deep valleys on three sides, and they thought no one could attack them. And I think if we do an application today, is the same way. We look at our leaders sometimes, individuals that are wealthy, that have money in their bank, and they feel like there's nothing that they do can harm them because they are financially secured. And we seeing that even today in this current pandemic that we have, is that if the goods are not there on the shelves, no matter how much money you have, you're not going to be able to purchase those things. And if the people around us are suffering, it doesn't make a difference how I feel or how secure I am because my fellow brother is around me. This is a golden opportunity for us to exercise justice for all people, and especially for our leadership. I'd like for you to think on this question as we end our lesson. How will you respond to someone who says that the Lord's promise to punish contradicts the claim that God is love, as noted in 1 John 4:8? And that verse says, he that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. So how can God, who is love, actually punish individuals as he punished the chosen children that is going to allow his Messiah to come through? That's a good question. Think about that. And then this is the same picture we did last week. Are you fireproof? Are you fuel for fire? Let's just continue to think about that. And are you the one executing judgment on others? Are you receiving the judgment of others? Are you fireproof? Are you fuel for fire? And our thought to remember is choose the way of life. Thank you. See you in Sunday school.